At Enbridge, we monitor our pipelines around the clock, using trained operators and computer monitoring systems. Because for us, safety isn't just a job. It's a 24/7 commitment.
Please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Sandy Baruah.
I do own other clothes. I'm just saying. I did not mean to wear the same thing. Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 11th Annual State of the Region by the Detroit Regional Chamber. What better way to kick off this event, not just this event, frankly, but the moment of time that we're in with an address, a fabulous address, by our former congressman, our former governor, our former ambassador, Jim Blanchard. Governor, thank you so much. That was absolutely perfect. And Janet, thank you for being Jim's adult supervision for all this time, and thank you for being here today. So more thanks. First of all, I have to thank our incredibly generous and wonderful longtime sponsors. First of all, Citizens Bank. Thank you to the Citizens Bank team for being with us for so many years. Yasmin, JC, thank you for your opening remarks. Great job, really appreciate it. Our regional stakeholder sponsor is our longtime friends, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. Our regional leader sponsors are the Detroit People Mover, Enbridge Energy, Farbman Group, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and Verizon. Please, a round of applause. And my thanks to those of you who sponsored tables that you brought your teams at. Flagstar Bank, Independent Bank, the Smart System, and Visit Detroit. Thank you all. And perhaps my biggest thanks, and I do want to acknowledge and recognize, will the board members of the Detroit Regional Chamber please stand up? Thank you for your incredible volunteer service, and everyone be nice to them. Performance evaluation time is just around the corner, so please buy them a drink on their way out. One of the many things that I am so incredibly proud of the Detroit Regional Chamber team is our incredible focus on research and data. We try very hard to be data-driven in all that we do. And many of you who have been coming to this event know that it's not just the State of the Region report that we do. We have multiple data platforms that are available to you, to your businesses, to whatever entity you run to allow you to make better decisions. We have a polling relationship with the Glenn Gariff Group where we do multiple statewide polls every year. We have a long-term relationship with the Gallup organization, also focused on polling, especially around the lives of Detroiters and those in the Tri-County area. At your table, you will see another annual report that we do, which is the State of Education and Talent, which oddly enough is focused on education and talent issues. Our Mich Auto team does an annual report, Michigan is Automobility, which is a deep dive data report into the state of next generation mobility and automotive in the state of Michigan. We run the Detroit Regional Data Center where you can go online, or more importantly, someone who works for you can go online to this site and create your own customized report and frankly, brand it with your logo on it. And also, this brand, State of the Region, is now a quarterly economic report, which we're going to make available on our website. So lots and lots of data available to you all to use in addition to what we use. So the panel is back. I am so delighted that I'm going to be joined in panel discussion after the data report, certainly by Governor Blanchard. I'm so pleased that our friend Colin Bird, the Consul General of Canada, will be joining our discussion. The Senior Counsel at Warner Norcross and Judd, Idea Desmonde, did I get that right? No, I did not. Who is an international trade expert, will be joining us. And moderating our program, I couldn't be more delighted that our friend, my friend, the fabulous journalist, author, musician, Devin Scillian, will be moderating the panel. Devin, thank you so much for coming back for this. You know, Devin, ever since you left the anchor desk, I've been forced to get my news from The Daily Show. You know, before we jump into the data, I just want to recognize, you know, something really fantastic that's going on here. This region has always been a leader in innovation. There's a reason why the US Patent and Trademark Office opened its first office outside of Washington, D.C., right here in Detroit. It's because the amount of innovation, the amount of patents that this region files. But for all of our great innovation and patent powerhouse, all of our innovation, for the most part, has been within the great companies that reside in this area. About 13 Fortune 500 companies just in this broader region alone. But what's happening now with things like the advent of Michigan Central Station, the new University of Michigan Innovation Center, what Dan Gilbert wants to do on the Gratiot site around healthcare innovation and health technology, along with all of the other terrific assets that we have, like TechTown at Wayne State and the Karmanos Cancer Research Center, what Bob Riney and the Henry Ford Health team are doing on Grand Boulevard with Michigan State University. These are all new, plus our existing innovation, open innovation assets, really have the potential to accelerate this region's regional innovation economy and give us a whole new gear as we accelerate into the 21st century. Another exciting thing is that we have three relatively new presidents in our major universities, our R1 universities, Kimberly Espy and Kevin Gustowitz and Santa Ono. And the three of them not only have developed a fantastic relationship, they all have deep backgrounds and expertise in innovation and in entrepreneurship, and they are all committed to work together, and they are working very closely together to really drive this next generation innovation economy, not just for the region, but for the broader state of Michigan. And the Detroit Regional Chamber wants to congratulate our friends at Michigan Tech, who just made R1 status earlier this year. That's 4 R1 universities in the state of Michigan, and nothing says how much we are an education powerhouse in having 4 R1 universities in a state our size. And this innovation corridor, we really need to focus on this Ann Arbor to Detroit, and then eventually Ann Arbor to Detroit to Windsor to Toronto, broader innovation network. This is what they do in the Bay Area. This is what's happening and has happened in Austin. We can do the same thing, but we can do it binationally. And I'm really pleased that with Santa Ono's leadership and with the support from the Chamber and his partnership with Wayne State University and Michigan State University, we are well on our way to start the outline of this innovation corridor under the umbrella of the work that Business Leaders for Michigan is doing at the statewide level to develop an innovation strategy for the state of Michigan. All of these things are hugely important as we move forward. So the the State of the Region report that you have in front of you obviously is chock full of data, and frankly, the slides I'm about to show you are chock full of data, but I'm only going to show you a fraction of them. And to give this conversation just a little bit of shape, we've created 4 buckets for this presentation. So our first bucket, we're going to focus on growth that we can celebrate, things that we can get really excited about and have good reason for because of the data. Comparisons of concern. This is the bucket of data where we might look good in isolation, but when you put it in a national context or compare it to our national peers, the story starts to fall apart a little bit. We want to focus on inflation. We know that this has been a major issue over the last 2.5 years in this country. We want to talk about the impact of inflation. And then we want to talk about how things are changing quickly, because we all know the federal policy environment is anything but certain. But let's start off with the incredible things that are happening here. Is there ever been a better time to be a Detroiter? I mean, everything from how well our sports teams are doing, the fact that Michelin now has a Detroit guide, to the celebrity-filled opening of Michigan Central Station, the NFL draft. It has been such an exciting time to be here. We have so much to be proud of, and we see that in a lot of the data. Just look at gross domestic product. We have had strong economic growth all throughout 2024. And this is an area where we have essentially kept pace and in some cases exceeded the growth of the United States. And anytime we can have data points that show that we're doing better than the US average, as we did in the middle of 2024, this is good news. And so this is something that we should celebrate. Employment, perhaps maybe the most important thing. Do people have jobs? We can also celebrate this. There's been strong employment growth across the country, 11% over the last 4 years. This region has matched that. That is tremendously good news. Home prices, for those of us who are homeowners, it's kind of yippee season, right? The Detroit region's average home prices have grown 8% in the last year. And that's only compared to 5% across the nation. We are outstripping the nation in home prices. Not only are we outstripping the nation, we're one of the fastest growing home price markets in the country. Commercial real estate, we all talk about, return to office and empty office buildings. We have less of a problem in that than the rest of the country on average. When you look at industrial real estate, we have a 4% vacancy rate, where the nation has a 7% vacancy rate. Commercial office space, we have a 12% rate compared to the national 14% rate. These are good numbers and certainly better than our national peers. Venture capital, and I wish Chris Rizek were here from Renaissance Capital, but he has really led the way in planting a flag and making Michigan an attractive place for venture capital. We have grown 48% in the last 5 years in venture capital activity, whereas the country has grown at only 36%. This is terrific news. And over the last 2 years, there's actually been a dip in venture capital activity. That's because there's a lot of reasons for that. But nationwide, it's down 12%. We are essentially held steady at just negative 1%. Again, really good numbers. So let's shift to areas that we are concerned about, where we have good numbers, but they're perhaps not good enough. So last year, about this time, the Governor's Population Commission dropped its report, and it was an excellent report, co-chaired by two friends of ours, Shirley Stancato and Ambassador John Ricolta. And it highlighted what we need to be doing to grow our population. And this chart tells you exactly why. We are 15th out of 20 when it comes to population growth compared to our 20 largest metro peer regions in the country. When you look at our 1% growth over the last decade, it certainly pales in comparison to places like Austin and Nashville and Dallas. Let's take the comparisons just a little bit further. GDP growth, we're 17th out of 20. Job growth, we're 14th out of 20. Income growth, we're 17th out of 20, and in educational attainment, we're 18th out of 20. If there is a slide in this presentation that makes all of us, as business leaders, as community leaders, as education leaders, take note of the work that we have in front of us, this is that slide. Now, unemployment. It's long been true that Michigan and the Detroit region's unemployment rate always resides above the national rate. Well, that certainly was true at the advent of COVID in the spring of 2020. In fact, our unemployment rate in the early spring actually jumped up to 14% higher, but the annualized number is about 11%. Again, above the national average. But there was good news. As the economy accelerated and people had money to spend throughout kind of the COVID time, starting in late 2020, early 21, our unemployment rate essentially reached national levels. That was a really great sign. We're starting to see that diverge again just a little bit. If you look on the left-hand side of this chart, and this information is updated as of Friday, so it's late-breaking news. The United States' unemployment rate is 4.1. Our region's unemployment rate is now over a point higher than that at 5.2. So we're starting to see that diverge again, and there's that old saying that when the United States catches a cold, Michigan gets the flu. Let's hope this is not the beginning of that particular trend. Now, I have long celebrated since 2021 the explosion in new business applications in the state of Michigan. There's nothing that can predict future economic growth than the filing of new business applications. One of the reasons why we had such a slow recovery, the nation had such a slow recovery coming out of the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, is that this dynamic didn't occur. We usually get this incredible explosion of new business starts, new business applications during economic turmoil. We didn't get that in 2008, 2009, and the years to follow, thus the very sluggish recovery out of the Great Recession. When COVID hit, we saw an explosion of new business applications. Hugely, hugely positive news. The problem is as impressive as our numbers are, the nation as a whole is still doing just a little bit better. And if we want to start this trend of us outstripping the nation in economic growth, we need to outstrip the nation on new business starts and new business applications. So we all know that the job market is cooling. We have seen this trend over time, but it's cooling faster here. In other words, it's a little bit chillier here than it is in the rest of the country on average. If you look at the lower left-hand side, the nation as a whole has, over the last 5 years, they're down 12% in job openings. We're down a third. So the job market's still good, but it's not great. In fact, this shows you that the job market is good, but not great here in our corner of the world. Before the pandemic started, there was 1.6 job openings for every unemployed person in the metro area. At the height of the red-hot job market coming out of COVID, it was more than 2 jobs available for every unemployed person in the region. Now, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So that still indicates a healthy job market. It's just not as red-hot as it was. So shifting to inflation. Now, it's taken a while, but economists, people like me, people who have been, frankly, doing a better job of looking at the data than we were at understanding the people, we would look at things over the last 2.5 years and say, well, let's see, inflation is cooling, spending remains super strong, incomes are rising, but through all this, we couldn't understand why consumers were so cranky. And certainly we saw that in the 2024 election. Now the data is painting the clearer picture that the people were right and the people like me were wrong. So let's set the stage, let's rewind the tape and look at where inflation has been. So inflation peaked in the spring of 2022 in this region at just about 10%. Now, it has dropped precipitously, and we ended the year 2024 at 3%. Now, 3% is not the Fed's target of 2%, but it's a really solid number. But the problem is that people want prices to go down. And there's a problem with that, because that's called disinflation. And while high prices, prolonged high prices, are painful, they're a problem, about the only thing worse is disinflation. And if you want further proof of that, talk to any Japanese policymaker or economist, because the nation of Japan has struggled with their economy. One of the primary reasons is disinflation that they have suffered through for 30 years plus. But the impact of higher prices and the inflation that has been built up, pent up over the last 2.5 years is real. The average price of a car is up $10,000. That's almost 30%. But perhaps more importantly is people's grocery store bills. Over the last 5 years, a bag of beer, butter, bread, and bananas and other things is up almost 40%. That's a lot. And it explains why people are cranky. Household incomes, well, in real dollars, it's down $3,000 compared to prior to the pandemic. That's $3,000 in real dollars that households have less to spend on, well, beer, banana, bread, and butter. That's a problem. Now, an interesting fact, look at the lower left-hand corner again. The lowest paid workers in our economy, the lowest 10 percentile, actually got the biggest income boost throughout the pandemic. Now, let's face it, it's easier to move numbers when you're at $12 an hour or $17 an hour. It's easy to make big swings there. But they got the biggest percentage gain in their incomes than any other income group in the country. The other fact that I want to make sure that we recognize, moving to the main part of the graph on the right, is that the United States' average household income is almost $78,000. In this region, we're only at $72,500. So the average Detroit metro family makes notably less dollars than their national counterparts, and we have $3,000 less to spend. Personal savings rate, again, this is another area where we saw some really interesting data. If you go back to the early 2000s or the mid-2000s, I mean, that's really rewinding the tape. Our savings rate, our personal savings rate, was essentially just above 0%. It recovered in the years leading up to the pandemic. In the pandemic, it spiked 15%. Obviously, people had no place to go. There was a lot of federal money coming. They were saving a lot of money because they had no place to go. But now, we are now back lower than we were prior to the pandemic in the savings rate. People are spending through whatever savings they accumulated during the pandemic. So, finally, final section. Want to remind everyone that all the data in this report is rear-view mirror looking. And past performance certainly does not guarantee future performance. And this is what I want to focus on over the next handful of slides. We are starting to see the early signs of potentially a notable shift in the positive trajectory that we saw coming through 2024. We don't know if these are blips. We don't know if this is a trend. We don't know if this is just kind of the churn and turmoil of maybe some short-term uncertainty coming out of Washington. We don't know. But if you look at the lower blue line on this graph, this is the famous University of Michigan consumer sentiment number, has dropped dramatically, circled in orange there, from January to just to a week and a half ago. This is one of the biggest drops that we've seen, and it is rivaling the drop that we saw in the early days into the pandemic. Consumer spending, as I said, we have been on this upward trend regardless of what was happening in the economy. COVID restrictions lifting, federal policy, dumping money on businesses and individuals, federal money going away. Throughout all that, consumer spending kept rising. But now, just since the beginning of the year, you can see this line either start to flatten or potentially be going down. We don't know, but this is something certainly worth watching. CEO confidence. I don't have to tell you that this is a really dramatic drop. This is a drop, the big drop that you see here on this chart, that's just from January. So in just, literally 2 or 3 months, we have seen one of the biggest drops in nationwide CEO confidence we've ever seen. And Michigan is at a disproportionate risk with some of the changes that we are seeing potentially at the federal level. Everything from changes in EV policy, electrification, infrastructure, and certainly tariffs. And why is that? Well, as the governor clearly said, we're an automotive state. Our supply chains are completely integrated. There is no other state in the nation that has a more integrated supply chain than with the nation of Canada than Michigan, particularly around automotive and manufacturing. Energy, Governor Blanchard mentioned this as well too. We get a lot of our energy. In fact, Michigan gets a big chunk of its energy from our friends in Canada. Our agriculture industry. Michigan's top agricultural export destination is Canada. We are huge, and we are a very large agricultural state. And of course, just proximity. Governor Blanchard talked about the deep personal and social ties we have across the border. But more importantly, it's an economic relationship too. Think of all the Canadians who work here and all the Americans that work there. Think of the 6,000 plus medical professionals that come from Ontario to work in Michigan hospitals caring for us and our families. This is a very tight relationship. And 1 in 8 Detroit region workers are tied to our economic relationship with Canada. And there's about 650 Canadian companies that have major footprints in the state of Michigan. And fortunately, through our statewide polling with the Glenn Gariff Group, we know that Michiganders understand this. They understand the close relationship. Almost 70% in our last poll, which dropped in February, not that long ago, said that Canada is an economic friend of Michigan. And a majority understand that tariffs on Canadian goods will hurt Michigan's economy. And we certainly couldn't agree more. So, that is the thumbnail summary. We have growth that we can celebrate. There are areas of concern when you compare us with our national peers. The impact of inflation is very real, and Michigan is at a disproportionate risk with some of the federal policies that are being considered right now as we speak.